everyone, welcome back to The Bright Side. Today we are going to be doing my end of the year reading survey / reading stats. So this is going to be all about last year, so I'm a little bit late on this video, but better late than never. So this is going to be a reading survey, which I'll talk about later in the video. This is going to be some Goodreads stats that they have compiled based on me tracking my reading there, and then also a few extra stats that I have compiled on my own. It's going to be a giant look back on the year of 2019 and my year of reading and all kinds of different goodies. It's going to be a very long video, so if you're not in the mood for that, I will link some other stat type videos down below, like top favorite books of the year and things like that, if you're not wanting a super long video. But if you are and you're nerdy like some of us here on BookTube, just stay tuned. So first up, I have read a total of 153 books for 2019. 61 of those were physical books and 92 of them were audiobooks. So I know this is a ton of books for some of you. For some of you it may not be very many if you're like on BookTube and things like that. I am going to be doing a video on how to read 100 books for 2020. In 2017, I went from reading like 8 books a year to like 100, like almost overnight, and I have lots of tips and tricks. It's a lot easier than it seems. Reading over 100 is a little bit trickier, but you can definitely achieve this goal, and I'll be sharing tips and tricks to do this and how it's actually quite easy if you like reading and are wanting to do something like this. So this year was kind of swapped on its head. I listened to way more books than I read. Last year I think I read like 97 books and then I listened to like 60 or 70 books. This year it kind of swapped. This was kind of a big giant reading slump year for me, unfortunately. I did read a few things that I really loved, but nothing like I did in 2018. Had months where I only read like 1 or 2 books, or if I read 9 books, there was like a lot of graphic novels and things like that. So I just had a kind of a rough start right at the bat because I had like 3 or 4 friends come to visit me right in a row, and I never really got ahead of myself in January as far as just my life, as far as like cleaning and organizing and all of that stuff like I do normally in January, where like right now my Christmas stuff's put away and I'm deep cleaning and organizing and meal prepping and doing all those wonderful things. I kind of didn't really get a head start on that because I had friends immediately come to visit me, which was amazing, but some of them were kind of last minute and surprises, and because of this, I didn't read a lot. I also got sick right in the first of the year, kind of threw off my year, and I started watching TV again before bed instead of reading before bed, which is like the main tip I have if you want to read a lot more, is to read an hour before you go to bed. It'll help you fall asleep. We'll do so many great things. That being said, I still had a pretty great reading year overall. I hope to do a lot better in 2020 though. So Goodreads says I have read 151 books because I think it's because I read a couple of books twice. Like I read Nimona, the graphic novel, twice technically last year because I physically read it and then I listened to it, and I did that with Obsidio as well, and it kind of throws off Goodreads. Like they can handle rereads, but it can't really handle me reading the same book more than once in a year, if that makes sense. So according to Goodreads, I have read 51,099 pages. So that was pretty good. Last year I read 56,972 pages. Of course, this includes the audiobooks, so I didn't come anywhere close to physically reading this amount. It's just that's the technical pages that I consumed, either audio or physically reading. So that was really fun. I like looking at the stats like this as well. The shortest book I read was The Lost Sisters by Holly Black. This is a novella set in the Cruel Prince world. It was actually one of my favorite reads of the year. I really liked the audiobook. I really enjoyed it. I don't know what the actual shortest book that I read, probably one of the graphic novels. And the longest book I read was Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare. This is coming in at 763 pages. The longest book that I have ever read is Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix at 870 pages, but technically I've only listened to that one on audio. Shocking, I know. So this might actually be the longest book I've ever physically read, so that was kind of exciting, and I really loved it, so pumped about that. Most popular book I read this year was The Picture of Dorian Gray. This has 984,701 reads on Goodreads. So almost 1 million people have read this book according to Goodreads, and this is a classic. It's one of my favorite reads of the year. I talk about this in my top 10 physical reads of the year. Just great. It's one of the only classics I read too, so that was exciting. The least popular book I read was the Hitched series by G.K. DeRosa. This is kind of just a random series that I picked up because it's like The Bachelorette, and all the men she's trying to date are supernatural, and she doesn't really know that in the beginning. There's like vampires and werewolves and stuff. It's just a total guilty pleasure read, and it was pretty good, so that was interesting as well. Only 763 people have marked this as read on Goodreads. Now on to star ratings. I only marked one book a 1 star, and that was The Mermaid Singing by Lisa Carey. This was because if I am disliking a book enough to give it 1 star, I'm gonna DNF it. But because I was in the middle of Mermaid Marathon and this was like a really short book, I continued. And it didn't get better like I hoped it would. It was just so bad. It was really bad. I talk about that in my Mermaid Marathon vlog that you guys can see if you want. I'll link that up here in the cards for you. I had 3 2 stars, which is pretty good overall considering that my year was like fairly average. So Pride, Prejudice, and Mistletoe was 1, The Lost Girls of Camp Forevermore was 1, and Toil and Trouble was 1. So those were like my least favorite books of the year. I had 42 3-star reads. Not gonna really list those here, but just sharing the number. I had 75 4-star reads, which I probably need to go and adjust some of these because I don't remember liking that many books as compared to last year, but I might have rated them just based on the writing and stuff like that as well. So those would be like the Shadow and Bone series, Crooked Kingdom, The Cruel Prince, Wicked King, things like that. And then I had 25 5-star reads. Hopefully those numbers add up. A few of those being Red Rising, Hunted by Megan Spooner, and The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. I wound up rereading 26 books this year, some of those being Scythe by Neal Shusterman, The Madman's Daughter by Megan Shepherd, Caraval and Legendary by Stephanie Garber, just to name a few. I was really proud of the amount of books that I was able to reread this year. This might be why my number of 4-star ratings was high, because I read quite a few rereads. I did all of them via audiobook, either to prepare for a new book in the series or just because I haven't read them in a while, or because I was curious how the audiobook would go. So proud of that number. And I wound up reading or listening to 18 new releases. Again, most of these I did on audiobook, so some of those were Aurora Rising by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. I actually physically read that one. Finale by Stephanie Garber, and The Wicked King by Holly Black, just to name a few. Pretty proud of this as well. My goal is always to read at least 12, so 1 a month, but I surpassed this quite a bit, and I read some things that I hadn't been planning on reading. I don't actually own a lot of the new releases that I read for that reason, but I had some favorites in there as well. My most read author this year was actually Brian K. Vaughan, who wrote the Saga series. I read 9 of these graphic novels. I didn't really focus heavily on one author this year like I have in past years. I read all of Marissa Meyer's books last year, and Brian K. Vaughan was the most that I read because they're graphic novels. And I just flew through them. I like to talk about my most listened to narrator as well, because I kind of get attached to certain narrators and try to listen to everything they do. Rebecca Solar was a big one for me last year. I'm not sure who I listened to the most this year, but a couple of my favorites. Billy Fulford Brown, who narrates the House of Furies trilogy, Sea Witch and Sea Witch Rising, and a few others that I really loved. I really like her. I also really love Elizabeth Nolden, who narrates Cruel Beauty and Crimson Bound. She also narrates the Sea Witch Rising books, and she was also one of the narrators for Four Dead Queens. So those were the 2 that I heavily focused on this year. Some other ones I really love, of course, are Greg Tremblay, who does the Scythe series. I don't know a lot else that he narrates, but this is just phenomenal. Also Tim Gerard Reynolds, who does the Red Rising series. Again, haven't listened to anything else from him, but loved him. He was amazing. My best reading month, I actually had a tie for this, which is unusual, and I beat last year's. So February, I combined, read, and listened to 20 books, and I did the same thing in October. Part of the reason was because I read quite a few graphic novels during these 2 months, and I had readathons, I think, as well. So they weren't necessarily the months that I read the most pages, but they were the months that I completed the most story-wise. February was my best physical reading month as far as the books I physically read, and I read 12 books in that month. The month I listened to the most audiobooks was also a tie, so we still have October in the running with 11 audiobooks, and July with 11 audiobooks. For July, I did Mermaid Marathon, which is a readathon that is my creation that I hosted, and so I really made it a point to get a lot of reading and listening in, so I did a lot of mermaid books during that month. And then October, I was really into Spookathon, and I just did a lot of rereads and things, and so I did pretty good both of those months as well. So I read a total of 104 young adult books. I read 23 adult books. I read 2 nonfiction books, and I read 23 middle grade books. I don't think I read any actual children's books this year, which was a first for me. So pretty typical. I actually feel like I read a lot more adult books this year and enjoyed a lot more adult books this year than I have in past years, so that was exciting. Okay, so we've swapped angles here so I can kind of look at my computer a little bit better. Those are all of the stats I've personally compiled through Goodreads and just through writing everything down. I'm going to be a little bit more precise next year if possible, just because it'll be more fun. But now we're going to to do a end of the year reading survey by the Perpetual Page Turner. I will link the survey down below. It's just something that we like to do at the end of the year, so let's get started. So the first question is the best book that you read this year. You can break it down by genre or whatever. I am gonna go with the entire Scythe series. I read Scythe last year, but I read Thunderhead at the beginning of 2019, and I'm almost done with The Toll, and it's only the second day in January, so I'm gonna count it. This is just one of my new all-time favorite series. It might actually be my favorite series. We'll see how The Toll ends. I only have 2 hours left. I talked about this last year, dystopian series. It's amazing. You can check out my December wrap-up, which will be up in a few days, to learn more about it. Next question is a book you were excited about and thought you were going to love more but didn't. I am pretty good about knowing what I'm going to like or strongly dislike, except for this one, which was a complete disaster. I'll talk about this again in my December wrap-up. Pride, Prejudice, and Mistletoe. This is like a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but with holiday themes. I knew it was going to be like cheesy and predictable and ridiculous, but I strongly disliked it, and I was quite surprised. Most surprising book that you read in a good or bad way. I had quite a few for these, but I'm going to talk about the Four Dead Queens book by Astrid Schuldt. I think this is adult. It might be young adult. I'm not sure. This is like so strange, and I totally loved it. I listened to this on audio, had some fabulous narrators. I mixed this up with The Queens of Innislear, which is about a King Lear retelling. I thought that's what this was, but it's not. It's about 4 queens and we're in the future. There's a monarchy, but it's also sci-fi, and we have weird sci-fi things, and I don't know how else to explain it, but I kind of loved it, and I thought I was gonna hate it, but I really, really enjoyed this, and I hope that I can read more from her in the future. So, surprising read of the year. Next is a book that you pushed the most people to read, and they did. Hands down, the Scythe series. I literally, my friend Claire is reading it right now, or she just finished The Toll. I'm actually behind on her. And then my friend Letitia just texted me as I was filming this video asking me whether she should listen to the audio or read the book about this. Yay. My husband read this book. My brother's getting ready to read this book. Like, usually people around me, I don't have a lot of reading friends. I'm getting more this year, which is really awesome. But I think that I pushed this one the most because it's one of my all-time favorite series. So, yay. Best series you started in 2019, best sequel, and best series ender. For these, I have like different answers. This is probably the best series and series ender that I started in 2019. So I started Scythe in 2018, so I won't include it on this one, although that has the best like sequels. Of this one, I read the first trilogy. There is more to the series that set like 10 years in the future that I haven't gotten to, but this original trilogy is like wrapped up and complete. This is adult sci-fi. It's got a Hunger Games vibe to it, kind of. We're on Mars, we are all in different colors, and it's like rising against the man. It's got a school setting. It's absolutely fabulous. The audiobook is amazing. I was shocked. I'm so pumped to read the rest in the series. Forgive my ice maker in the background if you can hear it. We got an ice maker for Christmas because the one on our fridge doesn't work, and we love it. But he is a busy little ice maker, and he makes a lot of noise when he makes his ice. So I apologize. Next question is a new favorite author for you in 2019. And for that one, hands down, Megan Spooner. I read Hunted and I read Sherwood. Those are the only 2 that I've read so far. I do have a couple of her other books that I need to get to, but I can just tell that Megan Spooner is my gal. I read this one physically. I listened to Sherwood on audio. She does retellings almost exclusively, or sci-fi. I love them. This is a Beauty and Beast. Sherwood was Robin Hood retelling. I've raved about her. I'm so excited to read more. I can't wait to read her sci-fi series with Amy Kaufman because I like Amy Kaufman as well. But oh my gosh, Megan Spooner, I just get all the feels when I read her books. Next is the best book from a genre you don't typically read, and for that I'm going to go with the Saga series. I wound up reading like 12 graphic novels this year, and this is just an amazing series. I really, really enjoyed it. It is an adult series. It's very graphic, so just keep that in mind. It's sci-fi. We've got a Romeo and Juliet vibe going on. We've got 2 characters that are different species from different planets. They get together and they have a baby, and then they have to run from their own people basically because they've illegally had a baby together, and it's following the baby and like her remembrance of this whole thing, and it's really, really, really good. It's very graphic, overly sexually graphic in my opinion, but since I don't typically read graphic novels and the fact that I love this so much, it's got to be on this list. Most action-packed, thrilling, unputdownable book of the year. Probably Red Rising. I would say The Toll, but I'm technically not finishing it in 2019. This was just so action-packed. The first audiobook was 16 hours, the next audiobook's like 20 hours, and I literally felt like they were 3 hours. I would like come around the corner while I was cooking and just have my mouth open and be like, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening. It's so exciting. And I loved it so much. I read these super, super fast, and they were very action-packed and intricate and well written. I just loved it. Book you read in 2019 you will be most likely to reread next year. I am on a rereading roll. Pretty excited to listen to this one on audio because I enjoyed Sherwood on audio so much, and I love rereading my favorite books via audio and seeing how the narrators are and everything like that. But I have been rereading a lot. I like to reread books to catch up with series as well. So a lot of my favorite series ended this year. So I don't know if I'll be rereading a lot of my old series as far as that goes, but we're gonna put The Hunted by Megan Spooner and I don't know, a few others that I would like to get to. I'm not really sure. Favorite cover that you read in 2019? I'm gonna go with these because they were new releases, but Wicked King and Finale are some of the prettiest covers in every single edition. There were so many beautiful covers this year. I really liked Hunted as well, but it didn't come out this year, so I didn't include it. Most memorable character of 2019? Honestly, I don't know. I read so many books and ones that stick out in mind. Red Rising and Scythe just because I had such an undying love for them. Also Simon from Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy and the whole Cassandra Clare book series because I really fell in love with him as well, and just, you know, there were so many great characters. Most beautifully written book that I read this year was probably A Picture of Dorian Gray. The writing in this is just exquisite. The language of the characters, I feel like it stands the test of time. I couldn't put this down. I read it in 2 days, and I am not a fast classic reader, so cheating a little bit. I don't really answer these questions with all new releases because I don't read enough, so this one for sure. Next question is the most thought-provoking, life-changing book. Last year I would hands down say Station 11. This year I didn't really have a book that hit me that hard except for the Scythe series, just because in A Future Where We Don't Die there are just so many questions that come up and Neil addresses them all, and it's just so interesting and it just really makes you think about it. A book you can't believe you waited till 2019 to read. Honestly, this question doesn't apply to me because let's face it, there are millions and millions of books to read. There are thousands and thousands of young adult books that I majority read. I am super behind on really popular reads, so it never surprises me that I waited this long to read it because I technically have only started heavily reading again in like the last 3 years, so I haven't had anything sitting on my shelf for an incredibly long amount of time that I haven't gotten to, so this one kind of is like non-applicable. I am skipping a few questions on this list just to kind of keep this video a little bit shorter. So OTP of the year, you will go down with this ship. Basically your one true pairing, your favorite like coupling of the year. I don't know, I feel like anything I say is gonna kind of be a spoiler, so I don't really want to say anything particularly, but we'll just say a couple people from the Shatter Me series, and I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. Favorite non-romantic relationship of the year would be any of the characters in Red Rising. There's so much bonding and friendship and levels of camaraderie that are in here, and it's just so much fun to read about with just a ragtag team of characters. Newest fictional crush from a book you read this year. Again, I say this every year, it's kind of creepy for me to answer this question because I read so many young adult books, but technically the young adult men in the books are written like they're older than they are. So we're just gonna go with Thomas Creswell because he's just such a sweetie pie and I love this relationship. So this is probably one of my favorite romantic relationships. This is murder mystery series, kind of got Sherlock Holmes vibes, and I really enjoyed it. Book that put a smile on your face and was the most fun to read. Honestly, 10 Blind Dates by Ashley Elston. This is a library copy, sorry, it's shiny. I super enjoyed this. I read this for Christmas. I'll be talking about this in my December wrap up. It was so perfect, holiday festive. It had romance, it had growing up, it had family, and it just made me like super happy, and I really loved it. Best world building and most vivid setting. We're actually gonna go with Arch Enemies and Scythe, of course. I just think these are so well thought out and I can picture them so clearly in my brain, probably because they're sci-fi, so they're not complete fantasy, epic fantasy worlds where it's from scratch. It's basically based off our world in the future, but we've got some superheroes in here and then we've got some awesome stuff in here, so these two. book that made you cry or nearly cry, that would be the second book in this series, The Toll. It was a reread for me, but that was the closest that I came to crying. I didn't really cry with anything I read this year, but The Toll, there's just this one part, and I can't say anything about it, and you would never expect for me to cry there, but it just hits me every time, and I'm just like, oh, I just like it so much. The best hidden gem of the year, and for that I'm going to go with Hearts and Other Body Parts by Ira Bloom. This I read during Halloween because it's got Frankenstein vibes, it's got Dracula vibes, it's got Sabrina the Teenage Witch vibes. So good, and it was such a perfect Halloween read, and I got it recommended to it by a subscriber, and I loved it so much, and it was so surprising. I know this didn't come out this year, but I loved it, and you guys need to read it, especially around Halloween. So I'm actually going to stop the survey there. I kind of jumped around a bit. I don't want this video to be super long, and I don't also want to keep holding up the same books over and over again. So I hope you guys enjoyed this end of the year reading survey slash bookish stats. Let me know how your guys' reading year went down below in the comments. You can link any end of the year videos that you'd like me to check out. I'll do my best to check them out. And I am looking forward to all the wonderful things coming in 2020. I have a bunch more videos coming out. End of the year stuff, beginning of the year stuff, kind of all coming out in a row. So stay tuned for that, and thank you guys so much for watching. See you next time on The Bright Side. Bye!